So I asked myself this question, why is it that I felt interested in physics and in Krishnaji's teachings? My brothers and so on, they had other interests. They were not interested in all this. I can't really answer, but I think that each one of us is born with an inner nature or a swabhav, what is called swabhav. And somehow I enjoyed physics and mathematics more than biology or chemistry and so on. I can't explain why, but because I got reasonably good marks in all subjects. So then now I think that it is because there is a parallel between physics and Krishnamurti's teaching. In physics, we are always asking the question, what caused this? Whatever phenomenon happens, why does it happen? What is the cause of that phenomenon? And then the next step, what is the cause of that? And so on. Like, why does it rain? Because the clouds condense. Why does the cloud come? Because the wind blows. Why does the wind blow? Because temperature difference. Why is there a temperature difference? Like that, there is continuous inquiry. And Krishnamurti was more or less doing the same thing with respect to our psyche. He was saying, what is the cause of anger? What is the cause of hatred? What is the cause of attachment?
Same parallel.
In the same way, I mean, the inquiry had a parallel, similar. Of course, there is a scientific method which is not applicable here, that kind of experimentation and so on. But he was relying on observation. He was saying, don't just intellectually argue, watch yourself in the mirror of relationship, in daily life. And he said, if you do this without connecting with daily life, it can become an escape. Religion can become an escape if it's not connected with daily life. Therefore, it's important to, he would say, don't accept what I am saying. Consider it, question it, and doubt it, and investigate. Investigate through watching your own consciousness, the way it operates in daily life. And from there, pick up what you consider to be the truth. Don't memorize it, don't keep it in your memory, but this awareness of what is true and what is false is self-knowledge, which is the key to wisdom. That was what it was. So more or less he didn't say in these words, but I am paraphrasing it, that he is saying the other thing is knowledge, which you know. You get school and college and so on, you acquire from books and experts and your teachers, a lot of techniques and skills and knowledge. And this is self-knowledge, what is true and what is false, and this is the key to wisdom. So he was talking about the need to grow in wisdom. We all know how to grow in knowledge, but how does one grow in wisdom? There has not been the responsibility of education. Education has not taken that responsibility on itself. And he wanted to change that. And that's why he started educational institutions. He said, every human being needs both knowledge and self-knowledge. And you must therefore inculcate both the social and scientific inquiry and also the religious inquiry. And you must help students to come up on sensitivity.
Simultaneously, with the same breath, in equal grace.
And it should be a holistic concern for development of all faculties of the child. Not, body, mind, emotion, spiritual, everything, whole thing. Not just intellectual ability, not directed only towards getting training to get a job, and so on. So it was very fascinating what he was talking about, our day-to-day life. So that these two interests, they are still there with me, and they persisted. Both, what was my profession? and Krishnamurti was kind of a hobby. The hobby became the profession and science became hobby.
Sir, we are sitting at Krishnamurti Foundation, India, at the upstairs of this study center.
In Rajghat, yes.
In Rajghat. Rajghat Fort.
Yeah, Rajghat Fort, Varanasi.
Varanasi. There is a famous dialogue between Rabindranath Tagore and Einstein about so many things, life, beauty, and so many things. And very famous dialogue of Tagore that infinite personality of his soul comprehends the entire universe. They talked about beauty and consciousness at length. In continuation of that, since you are a scientist, well-known scientist, how do you feel beauty and science? Do they converge at any point?
Well, actually, there is a lot of beauty in science too. In every aspect of life, there is beauty. It is a question of whether one is capable of perceiving it, whether one is sensitive to it. In fact, Einstein has made the comment that the scientific mind, when it is probes deep into the universe, gets a religious feeling, which includes the sense of beauty in it. But if it is only directed towards making a device or producing some result and so on, then it is not. But if you are approaching it with a sense of wonder and as a mystery to be perceived, then there is beauty. The scientist also perceives beauty.
It's a matter of perspective of scientists and perspective of artists.
Beauty is a very strange thing. Beauty, when everything is in the right proportion, it produces beauty. And in nature, everything is that by definition in right proportion. That's why nature always looks beautiful. Even to the villager it looks beautiful. And to us also it looks beautiful, the educated man. Sometimes more beautiful, sometimes less. But the sense of beauty is innately there in our consciousness. It is not created by our thinking, or it is not... The sentiment is created by thinking and by memory. So the Hindu may see the cow differently because he has a sentiment about the cow, but not about the horse and goat and so on. So sentiment gets mixed with it, and that's from the conditioning. But if you are watching without the conditioning, in nature everything is in the right proportion. I mean, if you look at that river and the sky and the trees and so on, you don't feel that it is ugly or this thing. But a human being wearing a dress can look ugly because it is not in right proportion.
I think that is art.
That's
putting the things at its right place.
In its right place, in the right proportion. That creates a sense of beauty, and that is what the artist is aiming at.
But the perspective of an artist is always different from the perspective of a scientist towards beauty.
Yes, but the scientist is studying nature, and in nature everything is in proportion. Yeah. For example, science, there is science of music. Music produces lot of sense of beauty, no? And they analyze it, and they, in scientific terms, they analyze what is beauty to the human ear and human eye, and then they describe it. So, for example, the frequencies of the sounds must be in a sequence which has simple ratios. Otherwise, it will be apaswaram. It will be out of tune, like that. So there is a scientific basis to it too.
Professor Krishna, do you have faith in that there is an energy that is boundless, formless, within and without all forms, all matter?
I consider it as a possibility. You cannot deny it, but there is not a concrete evidence which I can give to assert that it is so. So for me, I don't believe in believing, because belief means what? Either you know, that means you have seen something and therefore you are saying that it is there, or you don't know. If you don't know, the honest thing is to say you don't know. It's not honest to believe something. Yeah. That belief is generally because you find it satisfying, you find it appeals to you or something. That has nothing to do with truth. My satisfaction and my preferences is a subjective thing. It has nothing to do with truth. So my answer, brief answer would be that I don't really know, but I consider it possible.
Possible. Krishna ji says that there is, one can say, silence or love or beauty. That, being a scientist, do you consider that silence is matter or it surpasses matter?
See, matter itself is a form of energy. The word energy in the religious field is defined very differently from in science. Science, it is limited to the ability to do work, and it is defined as work done or force multiplied by displacement and so on. So there is a lot of confusion because the same word is used, but the meaning is quite different in some religious texts and in science. So to avoid that confusion, I'm saying scientifically, mass is a form of energy. Energy is conserved. It can neither be destroyed nor created. Therefore, energy has always been constant. Energy in the whole entire universe of all the matter, all energy is completely conserved. It's still a big question in physics. The latest Nobel Prize was given to Penrose, and Penrose has very clearly said that no amount of matter coming together or atoms coming together can give rise to a property called awareness, because it's dimensionally something different. So for example, computers have memory, computers can think, computers can calculate faster than we do, but a computer is not aware of what it is doing. I not only think, I am aware of what is happening, what my thinking is, what my motive is, and so on. This awareness, science doesn't know what it is. And that is part of consciousness. That's part of consciousness.
Even Penrose...
The brain is understood.
Yeah.
That is thought and memory and so on. That is understood.
Even Penrose uses this term shadows in his book Shadows of Mind.
Yes.
Consciousness, intelligence, is it timeless, eternal in that sense?
I would say so, yeah. Which doesn't mean that there would be no changes or movements in it, but that it is, there would be a substratum which should be constant, like what the Hindus call Brahman, or in other religions it's given other names and so on.
Okay. Now one can be aware of that intelligence.
It's operating in our body, no? How does the body retain so much order for whatever you live 80 years, 90 years or 100 years? And the body has such perfect order. A child is born in 9 months and everything in the body happens perfectly in order most of the time, 99% of the time, for the child to come out healthy and born. Occasionally things go wrong. So tremendous order is there. And to imagine that all that is happening mechanically, without any directive principle, this seems to me to be absurd. It is not possible. Like I said, it needs an engineer to design a motor car or a bridge or so on. You need so much intelligence to be applied for creating some kind of order. So doesn't nature need intelligence to create order? Only you need intelligence to create order? It is not rational. So that intelligence of nature, I don't know how it functions, but that is what this consciousness. And even people like Einstein believed in it. Heisenberg also talked about a central design which is there and so on. So very many scientists and great, but they don't have scientific proof because science has limited itself by definition to what can be measured and tested and produced reproducibly, found to be correct. Only that becomes the knowledge of science. So, and it's objective. It eliminates the observer because you have to, the same experiment is done by several observers, and only one, if it all agrees, only then it becomes part of science, right? So they eliminate the observer, which means that science cannot study the observer. And the observer is consciousness, right? So the scientist is using consciousness to do his science, but his science can't explain what he is using. You understand?
The scientists are engaged in measuring what is immeasurable.
That's right. And they are denying, I mean, those who are fanatical scientists, I am not one of them, they are denying what is not scientifically known, that the other doesn't exist. That to me is a belief, and science is contrary to belief. So I say that we don't know. What we know is it appears that there is all the measurable world where science gives the correct results, and there is the immeasurable world, which is the world of consciousness phenomena, which is beyond science. Because science, by definition, has restricted itself only to the measurable world.
Krishnaji asked you to join Krishnamurti Foundation, Rajghat?
Yeah, it was 1985, October, November. He came here for the last time, and he had not come here for 5 years before that, because he was cutting down on his travels and he stopped coming to Benares. But he came for the last time in 1985 because he needed to find someone to take charge of this place. And he asked for me that you call that. I'm just putting words to his mouth. I don't know what he said, but he said, call that boy who used to come to my talks and so on. They put a lot of questions. So they knew me, so they called me from BH.
Was he inclined to science, or found out that you are interested in his teachings, or he was searching for a good being?
Nothing to do with science. I think it had to do with the fact that I had been with his teachings for a long time. He said that to me also. He said, sir, when did we first meet? And I said, 1958. He said, oh, has it been that long? So you have been in the camp all along, he said. I said, yes. And maybe that, and also I don't know, it's a bit of a mystery how that kind of consciousness functions, because he never looked at my biodata. He didn't find out whether I was a vegetarian, whether I was a teetotaler. He didn't ask any of the things. In fact, I tried to protect him by saying that maybe we should take the advice of someone like Radha Bernier. And he said, I don't need advice, sir. With me, it's all done here, like that. So I have put all that in my book, Jewel on a Silver Platter.
Silver platter.
Yeah. So anyone who is more interested in that, it reveals how he related with people and how he appointed the heads of his institutions.
May we go on with what we were talking about yesterday? As we said, we are taking a long journey together in a railway, very long journey, right throughout the world. And that journey began 2.5 million.
Krishnaji never made this division. He talked only about the absolute teaching, the quest for truth. He didn't talk about how to live when you are not wise and when you are having the ego. So he was not interested in solving social problems.
Why always a wise man like J. Krishnamurti, they refuse all the memory of the presence, like from Vedic seers and Socrates and Buddha, Confucius, all. Why they negate? Actually, this is not negation. or we usually find in the sayings of, in the words of all wise men, they negate all the past persons from the wisdom.
Well, if you have to come upon the perception of the truth which Buddha may have seen and may have revealed through his talks, but unless you have seen, it is only an idea in your head. And truth is not an idea, it's a perception.
Oh, all they become an idea, part of our memory.
When you read the book of a teacher, including Krishnamurti's book, what your mind picks up are ideas or questions. If you don't explore them in your own life, it never becomes the truth for you. So the professor of Buddhist philosophy is not Buddha.
Yeah.
No, he is like an ordinary man. He has ambition, he has greed, he has selfishness, he has jealousy, he quarrels with his wife. He's just like an ordinary man at the level of consciousness. But he has all these words explaining what the Buddha said, what it meant, and what other people wrote about that, and so on. But that does not transform consciousness. So this knowledge in your head does not transform consciousness.
Yes. So if I repeat Krishnaji's words, or if I wear like Krishnaji, so I am a second-hand man.
That's right. You become second-hand.
Unless the inner
So
transformation.
he refused to accept disciples, because disciples who will follow you, he said you can't follow. And I just explained to you how you can't follow, because you can decide only about superficial things. About deep things you can't decide. Even, how can you decide from tomorrow you won't worry, or you will remain happy, or you will perceive beauty? You can't decide that. It has to come to you. So it's a byproduct of a lot of exploration and understanding.
Sir, finally, whole of your life, as an essence of your life, do you feel there is something beyond all phenomenal world or forms, which usually we name it God or the pure consciousness?
Well, there is a lot that is beyond the known and beyond science. There is a lot that is beyond science.
What you attained in your life?
I can't talk about any single experience that I consider to be beyond the known and so on. You see, this quality of insight occurs in all fields. Einstein had an insight into space-time, matter and energy, which nobody else had and which was completely different from what he was trained into and so on. So there is insight in science too, going beyond the known and picking up something from the unknown and bringing it into the field of the known and then explaining it to people. All great discoveries have been made like that. The thing is, in the religious field, knowledge doesn't have much of a role. If you don't have insight, you have ashes. You have only ideas of other people. And as you said, you're a second-hand human being. Because a tape recorder also has all that. No, tape recorder has no wisdom, but it can repeat what Buddha said.
So do you feel scientifically insight is not from time, or insight is timeless?
Timeless in the sense either you have had it or you have not had it. There is no such thing as 50% insight, then 70% insight, then 100% insight. No, it doesn't grow like knowledge. Either you have perceived or you have not perceived. That moment of perception is the moment of insight. So it is timeless.
Insight is timeless. Does Krishnaji use intelligence for insight?
He uses it, in my opinion, for wisdom. That means
Pragya.
Capacity, pragya. It's more pragya than gyan.
So intelligence is pragya,
Yeah,
and insight is antardrishti.
antardrishti.
Okay, and wisdom or pragya is not knowledge, gyan.
No. There is a beautiful verse which talks about this difference, if I can remember it. It says, knowledge and wisdom, far from being one, oft times have no connection. Knowledge dwells in minds replete with the thoughts of others. Wisdom in those attentive to their own. Knowledge is proud that it knows so much. Wisdom is humble that it knows no more.
Professor Krishna, how do you see the presence of Dr. Annie Besant on this earth and in India?
In my view, there were two lotuses that bloomed in the Theosophical garden. One was Mrs. Besant and the other was Krishnamurti. There were other great people also, but these two were outstanding. Mrs. Besant had a global mind. Even though she was born in the 19th century, 1st October 1847, about 100 years before our independence. But she has had a most dramatic life, caring about injustice everywhere in the world. She didn't confine herself only to Ireland or only to England. If it was in Afghanistan, if it was in India, if it was in Egypt against her own government, the British government, she would raise her voice. Similarly, she would raise her voice against exploitation of labor. She was responsible for starting the labor union movement in England. She was responsible for allowing family planning for women, otherwise it was forbidden in the country. And she was imprisoned for all this. But she was a tireless person, crusader, working for the rights of the deprived. If you read her biography, which ends before she reaches India, she's already done enormous amount of social work in England. And she was a well-known figure there. Whenever she felt something was true, she would give up everything and go after the truth. That was the remarkable, fearless quality which that woman had, which is so rare to find. In fact, when I asked Krishnamurti in this very room here, "Sir, why is it so difficult to deeply understand what you are pointing out?" He said, if Amma had been younger, she would have got it. That means you needed that kind of fearless and courageous pursuit of truth to actually see that and feel that and be one with it, with what is being pointed out. And because other people don't have that, therefore they are not able to. He knew that Mrs. Besant had those qualities. because she rebelled against the Anglican Church, the Christian faith and their hypocrisy. Then she became a free thinker. She joined Charles Bradlaugh, became a rationalist and an agnostic, not believing in God. Which is why her marriage broke up, because her husband was a clergyman. And he took away the children also. But when she was clear about it, she suffered all that. And she was a fighter. She would not give in out of fear. And she says in her autobiography that the only epitaph I want on my cemetery after my death is she tried to follow truth. That was her. And she did. All her life she did.
Does she come from the backdrop of theosophy?
No. She was a Christian, married to a Christian clergyman. She was in the Anglican Church. She came to theosophy only when she met Madame Blavatsky in 1891. Till then, she was not into theosophy. She was atheist or an agnostic. But after meeting Madame Blavatsky, and in particular reviewing her book called The Secret Doctrine, her eyes sort of opened and she felt that just being a rationalist, materialist was inadequate. And so she became a disciple of Blavatsky and joined theosophy. And she was such an orator for whatever cause she took up. She would keep audiences spellbound, absolutely. Even greater orator than Krishnamurti was. So whatever cause she took up, she fiercely spoke about it from public platforms. And it moved the public. So she started movements like that. Also, she was a Fabian socialist. So she fought for the socialist movement, for the poor people's rights and so on. In those days, the conditions in England were even worse than what they are today in India. Yeah. Women had absolutely no freedom and no rights. They didn't even have the right to keep their own money. Mm-hmm. It belonged only to the husband. Like that. Then, once she joined theosophy, she spoke for theosophy. Mm-hmm. And she was sent by Madame Blavatsky to the Parliament of Religions in 1893 in Chicago to represent theosophy. And there she meets Vivekananda. And she's spellbound listening to Vivekananda. And that's where she got struck by Hinduism. The Hinduism, not of the Hindutva people, the Hinduism of Vivekananda, which was all inclusive.
That is the later part of 19th century.
Yes, 1893. That very year she came to India. Because once she felt that Hinduism has such remarkable qualities after hearing Vivekananda, she wanted to come to India. And she came here and she was so taken up by the culture in India that she made it her home in Varanasi. So from 1893 onwards she lived in Varanasi. And then she took up causes of women's education. She started the Central Hindu College in Kamacha, which my father attended, and he said it was one of the best schools he had been to. he had known. And they didn't take grant from the British government. They didn't want the British style education. They wanted an education that was rooted in Indian culture for the Indian people. So it was a unique experiment. And when she found that Malviya ji came up with similar ideals, wanted to start a university, she donated the college to him. Because for her, the fact that she is doing it or owning it was not important. The cause was important. And when she found that an Indian is willing to champion that cause, she just gifted that college, and that became the nucleus of the Banaras Hindu University. Similarly, when Gandhiji started his movements and so on, she joined with him. She saw that he is able to move masses, go to the villages and so on, which she could not do. And so she handed over the Home Rule movement to him for a time. And he, out of his respect for her, made her the president of the Indian National Congress. That was in 1917 or 1917 or 18. She had just been released from prison. Gandhiji had fought for her release from prison against the British government.
Mrs. Besant's conversion to Theosophy astonished the public. Theosophists believe that Madame Blavatsky was telepathically guided by Tibetan masters, and Annie herself came to think she'd been a Hindu in a previous life. How had she jumped from atheism and socialism straight into such ideas? Well, Theosophy was very vigorous and attractive. It appealed to people who were in revolt against narrow, outworn creeds. It offered them a higher teaching, the wisdom of the East, an ancient universal truth that underlay all religions alike. And this was just what Annie wanted. Now, in those paradoxical days when so many of the British were looking to India for religious inspiration, talented young Indians were being sent to Britain to learn the ways of their imperial rulers. In 1890, the two groups met. Gandhi was a young law student in London.
Towards the end of my second year in England, I met two Theosophists. They introduced me to Madame Blavatsky and Mrs. Besant. The latter had just joined the Theosophical Society, and I was following with great interest the controversy about her conversion. I also read The Key to Theosophy, which stimulated me to read books on Hinduism, and disabused me of the notion fostered by the missionaries that Hinduism was rife with superstition.
Gandhi was profoundly influenced all his life by the teaching of Jesus, especially his concern for the deprived. But when he and Mrs. Besant went to India, they went as apostles not of Christianity and British culture, but of a renaissance of Hinduism. Her 30 years campaigning there prepared the way for his eventual triumph.
So she started the Home Rule movement. But later on she differed from Gandhi. And so she separated from him. The difference was that she said, don't involve students in politics. And Gandhiji was involving students and asking them to join the movement and so on. She said they are immature minds. Their job is to study and grow, and we should not use them for political purposes.
Theosophy, as we all know, has come from two words, that is theo and sophy. That means divine wisdom. It's a Latin word.
Do you feel Vedanta and Theosophy can coexist in equal grace?
I think Vedanta and Theosophy are the two sides of the same coin, because whatever we call Theosophy is nothing but ageless wisdom. Because in Theosophy we always try to reach to the goal where the ancient Vedanta takes us to, or aims to make us reach there.
She came to India, she did, and she made a home there, and she started learning Sanskrit. She learned enough Sanskrit to translate the Bhagavad Gita into English. There were other translations, but her translation is one of them, with her commentaries on it. So, extraordinary. Of course, she was aided by Bhagwan Das, who was a Sanskrit scholar and so on in Benares. And she met Vishuddhanandji. And Vishuddhanand told her about Krishnamurti. I mean, I have read this. I don't know this for sure, but I have read this both in Popul Jaikar's biography and elsewhere. Pandit Jagannath Upadhyaya also pointed this out. That Vishuddhanand said, yes, he is going to be the world teacher.
He was the master of Pandit Gopinath Kavirajji.
Yes, he was the master of Gopinath Kaviraj.
And master of Surya Siddhant.
Yeah. And Annie Besant used to go on a horse, ride a horse and go to meet Vishuddhanandji. That's what I have read.
people throughout the world are seeking comfort, but not understanding. And as long as they seek comfort, they will never find spiritual comfort, because behind it there is no true understanding of life. And for the understanding of life, you require harmony born out of this vast chaos which is taking place in the life of everyone and in every nation. For the establishment of harmony, you require no binding or limitation on life.
What I am inquisitive to know about her, she has an eye from the theosophy, like occulticism and other things, from Blavatsky and C.W. Leadbeater.
Yeah.
So, and the philosophy or the vision of theosophy is entirely different from Indian philosophy.
Not entirely different from Indian philosophy. You see, in Buddhism, all this is there. The Maitreya, the word itself comes from the Maitreya Buddha and so on. So, in fact, Madame Blavatsky and Alcott both became Buddhists. They converted to Buddhism after coming to India. Alcott became the president and she was the head of the esoteric section. The esoteric section practiced occultism and all that. And Mrs. Besant learned mainly from Leadbeater about occultism and awakened her own Kundalini and so on. So she had also those powers, but because she wanted to do a lot of social work, she told Leadbeater that you continue with these studies in occultism, I will give it up because I have to do all this social work and the two things cannot be done together. But before that, in 1908, they had already published a book called Occult Chemistry. And scientists later on have found parallels between what they saw inside the atoms and the nuclei. They actually saw quarks in groups of 3, triplets like that, which is true. All the modern science, at that time the scientists laughed at them. There is a book by Phillips, who is a scientist, who compared the modern science version with the version given in occult chemistry and found many, many parallels, a few disagreements between them also. So they were not always right. But they said, we make ourselves smaller than the smallest particle in this material in front of us. And they kept a mineral in front of them. And they said, what we are writing are our observations, not experiments and so on, through consciousness research they did. Like our rishis and so on must have done. Because how did they discover which plant will cure which disease? All this Ayurveda which was developed, they didn't do double-blind experiments and so on. This trial and error was not the method. They used to use consciousness, become one with the plant and enter the plant and find out what it is capable of doing. Something like that. I'm imagining, I don't have those powers.
You are thinking chiefly of yourself and your intolerable loss, but there may be also another sorrow, sun which never sets. Your feeling is most natural. I who speak understand it perfectly, and my heart is full of sympathy for all those who are afflicted as you are. But I hope that I can do more than sympathize. I hope that I can bring you help and relief. Such help and relief have come to thousands who were in your
So in 1925, Annie Besant called Krishnamurti and she handed over charge of education to Krishnamurti, saying, "You are the world teacher, you should be in charge of education." And she had already created the Order of the Star of the East, so Krishnaji had a separate organization of which he was heading. So he seriously took it up immediately, and he wanted to buy 400 acres of land for his educational work near Madanapalli, his birthplace. So he went there and he searched, and they found that Rishi Valley area, and he could sense that there were religious people living there earlier and so on. So he chose that place. And he asked Sanjeev Rao to get 400 acres of land on the banks of the Ganges in Varanasi.
Why Varanasi?
I think he had a close, very high respect for Buddha. And he in Theosophical Society, Buddha had a very high place. Alcott and Madame Blavatsky had both become Buddhists. They got converted to Buddhism. And this Maitreya word and so on is also coming from Buddhism. So he had great admiration for the Buddha, and they used to read a book called Buddha's Way of Virtue, and then have dialogues around it among themselves, like we read Krishnamurti and then have dialogues about it, like that. So he was quite into Krishnamurti, Buddha's teaching, and he had great respect for the Buddha. And because the Buddha landed in this area in Varanasi and walked to Sarnath, that story was known. So he had a special feeling, and he wanted also the fact that Varanasi had been, many sages and so on for thousands of years had lived here and so on. So that he wanted somehow that it should be on the banks of a very difficult demand. But Sanjeev Rao fortunately found this plateau, Rajghat plateau. At that time this was just a forest. And the British Army had sent its engineers to repair the Malviya Bridge here around 1928, 27, something like that. And this was railway land. And Sanjeev Rao negotiated with the British authorities, and he wanted them to sell this land. So they agreed to sell the 400 acres of land, and they were going to construct some temporary structures for housing the British military engineers. So he said, instead of temporary structures, please construct a regular house, and we will pay for the construction, because that I will use those houses later on for the educational purpose of Krishnamurti. So that is how this land came to be, and in those days it was called the Rishi Valley Trust. So the Rishi Valley land and this Rishi Valley Trust, and it was all also under the Theosophical Society, but later on when Krishnaji separated, they found that it was all the Rishi Valley Trust was separate, and the Order of the Star of the East was also not under Theosophical Society, because Mrs. Besant already had a vision that all world teachers have broken away from their parent institution. And so she knew that we should not expect that Krishnamurti will adopt Theosophy and follow Theosophy. He may break away from it. So she wanted his organization to be independent. So that's how Sanjeev Rao got this land. And there is an interesting story in this, that Sanjeev Rao wrote a book called Letters of Wisdom, which are really his letters to his niece in Pondicherry Ashram, who was living in Pondicherry Ashram. And in those letters he describes all his difficulties of getting the land and finding the money and that. So in that, he describes that the deal was struck for 25,000 rupees. In those days, 1 rupee was like 1 pound. So factor of 100 at least. And so 25,000 rupees was a lot of money. And so he went to Krishnaji and said, "Sir, I have found this beautiful piece of land as desired by you, but I don't have any money, and they are asking for 25,000 rupees. So what shall I do?" So Krishnaji said, "See, there is an envelope lying on my table. Somebody has donated money. I don't need money. I don't use money. Just see how much it is. Open the envelope." He opened the envelope and it was 25,000 rupees.
Miraculously.
Yeah, whether it was miraculous or whether it was the masters managing something, we don't know. But exactly 25,000 rupees had been sent for this purpose to him. And therefore this land was purchased. That was 1928. The first school was inaugurated here in 1934. Mrs. Besant died in 1933. In 1934, Rabindranath Tagore came and inaugurated the school. He had sent his architect, Surendranath Kar, to design the buildings here and so on. So all these buildings, this one where we are sitting, the Vasanta College office, the Gurtu Gardens building, the study center building, all that was designed by Surendranath Kar.
1928.
Also Vasant Vihar and many of the buildings in Adyar, they were designed by Surendranath Kar. Yeah, I don't know when it was designed, but 1934 the assembly hall was completed and it started as a Montessori school in that assembly hall, present assembly hall. So it's a marvelous building.
what was the idea behind the study center?
You know, when Krishnaji was alive, the work of the foundation was to organize his lectures, record them, conduct workshops or dialogues with him, and also hold camps in which people came, residential camps. But the central figure who would be addressing and conducting the dialogues would be Krishnaji. And they used to record that, and from those records they transcribed and made books. So that was the whole publications division. So he was asked towards the end of his life, "Sir, what will happen to all this activity when you are not there?" And he said, "This inquiry has nothing to do with me. It is something that every human being needs to engage in for the sake of self-knowledge, which is the key to wisdom. And therefore every human being needs this. And after I am no longer there, you should create an adult center." I don't like the word study because it's more than study. I'm quoting him. "It should be a place where there is quiet, where there is beauty, where there is respect for all life, and where the mind is deeply religious," meaning that by religious he meant in quest of truth, and study the teachings in relation to their own life. Create such a place. So he was asked, "We can create such a place, but how will we attract people to come there when you are not there?" He said, "You create the honey and the bees will come."
Very nice.
If you have to invite the bees, something is wrong.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very beautiful.
In the same way, he wanted a silent room where people can go and sit in silence. So Scott Forbes asked him, "Sir, what is the purpose of the silent room? If we go and sit there, will it bring silence?" He said, "No, you take silence to the room. That means you deserve to enter that room only when you have a silent mind." So his emphasis always was
Preparation.
on self-preparation and self-responsibility. Not begging, not asking answers from other people and so on. Yeah, in his words, you have to be a light unto yourself. So that was the purpose of the study center, and the whole, all these cottages and so on, except the Ganga cottage and the Parchure cottage, which were already there. All these other cottages where we walked just now were built in my time, after his death. I joined Rajghat on 17th of February, the same day that he passed away in Ohio. It's also strangely the day on which Alcott was born and which is observed as an Adyar day.
Oh,
And strangely, Krishnaji had said to me and also to several others that he knew when he was going to go, when he was going to die, but he's not going to tell anybody. So somehow I feel that he knew that the end would come on 17th February, and indeed it did.